Welcome back to KC Talks EV. And yes, it is finally time to talk about the MG ZS EV long range. This car has been kindly lent to me by Maple Garage. Personally, I believe that Maple Garage's customer service is second to none, and I've had a very good experience with them. In fact, actually, my current car, my MG ZS EV Mark 1, is currently in for its service. So, thank you very much, Maple Garage. So this video is going to be split into two separate videos as per usual for my review videos. So this video is going to be the impressions video, and the second video is going to be the range test and charging curve test video. This video in particular, however, we're going to go through four categories. So first of all, we're going to talk about the major changes compared to the Mark 1 ZS EV that I have. The things I like, and obviously some of the smaller changes compared to the Mark 1. Some things that I still believe should be improved on by SAIC or MG. And finally, we're going to ask the question, given the fact that the MG5 long range exists, is this a better value proposition, or does it actually target a different part of the market, and therefore both are perfectly equally great value propositions from MG? So anyway, let's get started. Okay, so I think the first category we should talk about are the major changes compared to the Mark 1 ZS EV. By the way, I do have some notes here just to make sure I don't forget anything. So, first of all, by far the biggest change is the brand new larger battery. So according to MG, we're looking at a 72.6 kilowatt hour total capacity and a 68.3 kilowatt hour usable capacity. That compares very favourably, and in fact is much larger compared to the Mark 1 ZS EV, in which that one had a 44.5 kilowatt hour total capacity. And although they didn't quite quote the usable capacity, in my testing at least, have got around 42 kilowatt hours, excluding battery degradation. The second biggest change is obviously the design. So I've got some nice footage here to show you, but essentially it has had quite a heavy facelift. And in fact, actually, I do kind of appreciate this one, especially with the brand new LED headlights, in which I'm going to talk about, and the rear tail lights as well. And in fact, I think it's a very, very tasteful refresh. That being said, you can clearly see that this car is still got the original body of the Mark 1. It's kind of like the Nissan Leaf in that approach. So I think the next section we're going to talk about are all the little changes that have made this car certainly a lot better. Okay, so what are the smaller changes that MG have implemented in order to make the Mark 2 slightly easier to live with? Although that being said, my Mark 1 has been absolutely fine. So first of all, we've now got LED headlights as standard. I couldn't believe how bright these are. The video that I've got here probably won't do it any justice. However, these are absolutely lovely to use. Originally, when I first got in the car, I thought this car defaulted to high beams. That's how good they are. In fact, actually, I really have no idea how I'm going to go back to my halogen lights. This whole sort of dashboard design has also been completely redesigned. So now you've got digital dials, and you also have a digital display to give you general information. That is much better compared to the Mark 1 in terms of that had analog dials with a much smaller screen in it. So most certainly, I think a lot of people will appreciate that. That being said, I'm not as keen for the actual digital, for example, speedometer or the tachometer or power meter. I don't quite like that compared to, for example, my analog dials. I feel as though analog dials are much easier to read at a glance, but that's just me. Another thing that's been upgraded is the 10.1 inch touchscreen, and wow, this is much smoother to use compared to the previous Mark 1. In fact, actually, it is an absolute joy to use now. I will talk one little thing about it, which I'm not too keen on, which is the lack of buttons in I think possibly they could have added some extra buttons and some room for improvement. But most certainly, this is excellent now. The lag or the latency compared to previous has basically been reduced to almost nothing, and not to mention, it's just a much easier thing to use. Another thing that I have noticed is now we have Qi wireless charging as a sort of place in the center console. So the previous car kind of had a place where I would have expected it to be there, but weirdly it didn't. Now we have it. I've also noticed it has USB-C for charging, as well as USB-A for your Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. So that's quite nice. We now have 360-degree cameras around the car. So my biggest issue with the ZS EV is because it doesn't have front parking sensors and you can't really see the front, it becomes a bit difficult when it comes to parking. Now, because you've got a front camera as well as the side and the rear cameras, most certainly it is much easier to park and to make sure that you're not accidentally curbing wheels and things, which I certainly have, and I'm unfortunately going to admit that yes, I have curbed the wheel on my Mark 1 ZS EV. In fact, I think I've managed to curb 3 of them, I think. So yeah, it's going to be definitely a huge advantage to anyone buying the Mark 2. Another thing you can now do is you can schedule charge. So on the Mark 1, the only way that you're able to do that is via a charger, and obviously that is charge dependent. Now the fact that you can do that via the screen and inside the car makes that much better. In fact, actually you can limit the amount of percentage at charging stations to 70, 80, 90 or 100% depending on what you want to do. And the final thing I should mention is in the rear, we now have cup holders and an armrest. We also have an air vent as well. By the way, this car now has proper climate control, not the modified one that I've got in my Mark 1 ZS EV, as well as it also has 3 headrests in the back. So one thing, as far as I'm aware, is certain places in the UK, if you're a taxi driver, you need to have a headrest for every occupant. Now, because you now have 3 headrests, you can now have 3 occupants. So, this section is the things that I still think need to be improved. So, first of all, the auto high beam is not very good. It still seems to flash and blind other vehicles. So what it does is essentially when a car gets out of its range, it then turns on the high beam. Then obviously you get the reflection from the high beam, which then turns it off again, effectively flashing another driver. You can disable it, and I've now found out actually in some vehicles that it turns back on when you turn off the car. But in this case, and in my Mark 1 ZS EV, it stays off. So yeah, first thing that I would do personally is turn off the auto high beam. The second thing, which is kind of weird, and to be honest, I'm very surprised about this, is that you don't get regenerative braking with MG Pilot. So with the MG5 long range, for example, when that got MG Pilot, you now get regenerative braking. This still doesn't have it, just like my Mark 1 ZS EV. I'm not quite sure exactly the reason why, but I still think that is a bit of a short-sighted thinking, at least, and I think possibly in an update it would be lovely if we could get that going. But overall, honestly, I think the positives definitely outweigh some of the rooms for improvement. Okay, so do I believe that the MG ZS EV long range is a great value proposition? And I think in short, the answer is yes. You get better technology, you get a bigger battery with better range, and in fact, actually, in terms of charging speed, as far as I'm aware, it is actually much flatter and most certainly is an improvement over the Mark 1 ZS EV. Now, the question that I will have to kind of ask, however, is whether or not it is worth it, or for example, would I pick this car over the MG5 long range? Now, if you had to ask my own personal opinion, and this is pretty much purely subjective, I would probably pick the MG5 long range. Not because this car is awful in any way, I think it's great. This refresh has definitely done wonders for a car which I think was starting to show its age, especially in terms of its competitors. But the MG5 long range is an estate body style, which I do prefer, not to mention it is ever so slightly cheaper, and the additional technology isn't the most important thing. I could essentially live without it, especially now with the long range. You now have MG Pilot, which was basically the only thing I really had any issues with. So yes, this car most certainly is definitely up there in terms of the list of one of the best sort of general sort of prices crossover SUV that you can buy, and I think hats off to MG for producing a car that is this good. So I think that's pretty much it. So if you liked the video or you found it informative, please give it a like. Dislike it if you didn't. Please share this video to anyone who is considering buying or purchasing a MG ZS EV or an MG electric car. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, but I think that's pretty much it. So thank you for watching and talk to you later.